Okay, here we go. Hello, I'm here to talk to you about a solution for laptops for schools. Laptops for schools recycles laptops from corporate entities and redistributes them to schools or sells them to recycling companies. They are operating out of a hub in EMEA and also in the US. I'm proposing that this solution will be a single org making use of multi-language and multi-currency features of Salesforce. So let's get started with our actors and licenses first of all. So for our internal users, we have a donation coordinator, a DC. They'll require a platform license. We have IT specialist. These are people who check the laptops out and research and service them before they're passed on. They'll also require a platform license. We also have a security specialist. These are people who deal with laptops containing personally identifiable information. They'll require a service cloud license because they're making use of entitlements and milestones. We have an allocation coordinator, an AC. These are the people who take care of redistributing the laptops either to school users or to recycling companies. So there's two flavors of that. They'll also need a platform license. We have our regional managers. They'll require a service cloud license. And for our external users, we have volunteers. These are people who set up the laptops within the schools. They will require a service cloud license. This is because they need a live agent to chat in real time. No, scratch that, wrong line. The volunteers will need a customer community license, and it is the virtual experts. These are other volunteers, but they will require the live chat feature. So that will be a live agent feature license. We have numbers on 1,000 virtual experts, and in terms of our donors, these are business corporations, Donor Corp. We have 5,000 of those. And they will need a Customer Community Plus license because they will need advanced sharing with roles. And finally, we have recycling companies. And these will need a Customer Community license. In terms of how that's organized with our role hierarchy, we have information relating to the regional managers and below. So as a global entity, they're distributed across approximately 15 regions for the allocation and distribution. So we'll have managers as our top level role that will repeat across all of the regions, and below the manager they will have reporting to them the allocation coordinator and for the schools, the allocation coordinator for the recycling, and the donation coordinator. The donation coordinator will be the account manager for the donor corps. They'll have a Custom Community Plus license. So those partner accounts also have need of a manager and a user role. In terms of the IT and security users, they are part of the 2 hubs, one in EMEA and one in the US. So there would be 2 of those. Let's just show the EU one. And that gives us our role hierarchy for our users. If we turn to the requirements on page 7, we've got some accessibility and visibility requirements. Corporations can't see other records. This will be done through the private accounts. The partner roles with our customer community license will allow us to control the visibility to tax donation amounts for the laptops. Actually, I better put the data model up before I go through those, that would help. So in terms of our data model, we're making use of some standard and a number of custom objects, as well as some external objects via Salesforce Connect. So first of all, we have our account. And we have several record types. We have the schools, we have the corporations, we have the recycler, and we have the volunteer. Volunteer will be a person account. The recycler will be owned by the allocation coordinator, and the corporations will be owned by the donation coordinators. And the schools will also be owned by the allocation coordinators. We have the associated contact. In terms of the tax information for the donations, this needs to be a separate object in order to control the visibility. So this will be a custom object with a lookup relationship off of the account, and will be owned by the distribution coordinator, and it will be private. The account also will be private. Tax info also has PDFs that will use the standard file object. In terms of the process overall, the school record type is able to create an application. This describes their needs for laptops, the types of laptops they require. This will be private and owned by the donation coordinator. There's also need to have information, documentary evidence for that. That will also be stored in files. I've just put a star on to note that it's a duplicate on the data model for the sake of neatness. We also have donations, which comes from our corporations. This will be owned by the donation coordinator. It'll be private. And this also has a relation to use Salesforce files. In terms of the items which are donated, this will be stored within a external object. This will be our laptop external object. And we calculate on average in any 1 year we'll have about 18 million records in there. So extremely large data volume. The Salesforce user will be used to relate the allocation coordinator user who is responsible for any particular laptop, and also the IT specialist who is responsible for refurbishing the laptop. Laptops will come by way of a donation. And then in terms of sharing them back out again, to either for the purposes of recycling or for allocation to a school. We'll have an allocation custom object. This will be owned by the allocation coordinator. It'll have a master detail relationship off of the account, both for the school and the recycling record types. We'll also need to assign to that a volunteer. That will come by way of an additional lookup relationship off of the account. There needs to be a record of who donated to any particular allocation and account. So this will be a junction object called donor between the account and the allocation. Finally, we need to deal with a couple of other aspects, which is the price that's paid for particular laptops specs. So we'll have a laptop model custom object, which will contain a catalogue of all the available laptop models and specs and the associated prices. Recycling companies can put in an offer price. So this also will be a junction object. Master detail off of account and a lookup to the laptop model. Laptop models will be associated in the intake process with particular laptops, thereby the value is going to be attached to them. Ultimately, laptops will be allocated. So these are all lookup relationships. We also need to keep a record of the software that was installed. So this will be an additional external object, which will be a child of the parent laptop object, and this will track the software assets which have been installed on that particular item. Finally, in situations where there is a PII found on a particular machine, a case will be raised, so we need to make use of the case object. This will be associated with a particular laptop through a lookup relationship. We'll have a couple of case types. There'll be one for the PII and also one for the virtual expert for their live agent chat. And the SLAs will be managed through the milestones. Okay, so just returning to the visibility requirements now that we've got the data model. Requirement number 2, only designated contacts at a corporation can see the tax donation amounts. This will be taken care of with the additional object is to store that information. The visibility will be granted through partner roles to the manager role, but not to the user role. Only users on the security team can update laptop records containing PII, so this will be done by way of a flag and a validation rule on the laptop. So that'll be a custom checkbox field on the laptop. In terms of being able to modify the laptop rates, so number 4, this will be a permission set for field level security, which by default will be read-only. For DCs, they'll have a permission set to set the field level security to read-write. Donation coordinators should only see laptops for their region. That will be done through a role share. The corporation tax ID and corporation letter document should only be visible to the distribution coordinators assigned to the account. So this is by way of this lookup relationship here, there'll be limited sharing for this, so it'll just be the distribution coordinator user who owns the account that will have access to it. Only the recycling coordinator should see the amount for third-party recyclings paid for the laptops. So this will be controlled through the profile field level security. Schools should be able to see all laptops allocated to them, but not other schools. So this will be done through a share set of for allocation based on the account for which the school for the school. Volunteers need to see school details, laptop serial numbers, and shipping information when they're assigned to laptops. So we will have that'll be stored on the allocation record, so they'll have visibility to that. And the lookup relationship will link them with the visibility. That'll be declared through the use of a share set because the volunteer has a customer community license. In terms of the access requirements, we'll come on to those shortly. So I think that pretty much takes care of the visibility requirements. Let's turn now to the business processes. So we have approximately 10 different business processes to take a look at. So first of all, we need to, we have a data mastering requirement around the donors and account coordinators. So in order to, I need to put the landscape up. I'm not having a good night. So let's just quickly add the landscape. So our new system will be Salesforce, and on top of that we will have our community. Our existing systems, we have our inventory management system. This will be where the record of all of the laptops and the software will be stored, and this will be exposed through our external objects through Salesforce Connect. We have a shipping and fulfillment system. And this will be used both for collections from donors and distribution to schools. We will have need of a BI analytics platform for cross-system reporting in the reporting requirements. This will be connected through to Salesforce via an ESB. So that will be both the inventory and the shipping and fulfillment system. Our BI system will be integrated with Salesforce and also the inventory system. In terms of the master data, which is the first business requirement, so we will have a work stream and a process and a project set up to perform a cleanup of the master data within the inventory system, and then we will use an ETL process to use that to load that into Salesforce, and then Salesforce will become the master for the records. So that will be the Salesforce account records for our recyclers and any other entities that we have. In terms of updating the inventory system back, this will be achieved through change data capture on the Salesforce side, which will be targeted towards the ESB, and the ESB will then ensure that the inventory system is updated. We have an external web service, an external website, which is the government valuation service. This will be connected directly to Salesforce through an integration. In terms of the identity, we'll be making use of Salesforce Identity Connect. And also ADFS for federated authentication. That'll be connected with the existing on-prem Active Directory. We have cloud storage, which is an existing system. I've made the assumption that this will be a common cloud provider, so I'm assuming it's going to be Google. And that will be integrated with Salesforce via the Files Connect. And we'll use the link mechanism in order to expose the index of the objects within Salesforce. We have an e-signature requirement, so this will be achieved through a third-party project, products such as EchoSign or DocuSign, and we'll select a product which comes with an integration for Salesforce in order to speed that aspect of delivery. In terms of our users, we have our corporate users. They will access through a browser. There is also a corporate asset management systems in use by larger corporations. They will be able to integrate information directly via our ESB. We will produce a public API for our assets. So it'll be the asset API. And the ESB will then take care of creating the donation information within Salesforce and also the laptop inventory items within the inventory system. We have our school users. They also access through a browser. We have our recycling users. Require browser access. We have our virtual experts. And our volunteers. In terms of the login to the system, the school users will make use of social sign-on using Facebook or Google. And the internal users will use SAML federated authentication with ADFS. User provisioning and deprovisioning will be taken care of by Salesforce Identity Connect. Okay. So we've talked about the cleansing and loading of the master data. In terms of the second set of business requirements, which is the donor upload process. So they currently have a manual import process. We will be replacing this using the Salesforce partner community in order to allow users to create their donation record. And then what they will do is upload a CSV file using standard Salesforce files. That will then update the status of the donation as being ready for review. The donation coordinator will then review the record, and if the file looks to be attached correctly, he will then update the status, and this will then lead to an integration which will fire. We'll make use of a fire and forget sales outbound message from Salesforce for the donation, which will target the ESB. The ESB is then going to fetch the additional information from Salesforce that's required, and also download the file. Now that the ESB is in receipt of the file and also the information, it's now going to transform and load the large amount of laptops into the inventory system. And then those records will then become visible within Salesforce through our Salesforce Connect external object. If the load goes okay, well, the result of the load will be sent back to Salesforce, so let's assume it goes okay. Then it will update Salesforce and change the status on the donation record in order to reflect that that process is complete. Okay, so I think that's an additional part to that. Yes, so the update will go back to Salesforce. The donation record will be then updated, and the distribution coordinator can review the status. If it all looks good, then they can set the status to be ready for shipping, and then that's going to now fire an integration which is going to cause the shipping system to create the appropriate records which will allow the collection of the laptops to take place. So again, we'll use an outbound message targeting the ESB that will then format the shipment record information and update the shipping system. The ESB will then confirm that the shipment's been placed, and then it's going to update our donation record again via the REST API. The last part of that is that we need to send out an email. So there will be a process builder which is waiting for the donation record to be set to a status such as shipping in progress, and then that's going to format an email using a language specific template in order that the email can be sent to the user at the corporation. In terms of the next process, so schools applying. School users will self-register on the Salesforce community. Once they've got their account set up, they will be able to create an application record and then upload any supporting evidence required as Salesforce files. We also have bulk upload required for our corporate users. So in terms of from the corporate asset management systems, so this will be integrated directly via the ESB. We will provide each user each appropriately provisioned donor account within corporation account within the account with an API key, which will allow them to call a REST API on the ESB, which will create the donation record within Salesforce and process the inventory items for the inventory system. Okay. Now we have a process around the discovery of PII on the laptops. So once the laptops have been received, they are going to be checked over. So they'll be checked over by an IT specialist. If they find that the hard drive contains information which is sensitive, then we're going to update the status we're going to update the status of the laptop record in order to indicate that. What will then happen is we'll use a flow, a headless flow, to create a new case record of type PII, and then we'll use a case assignment rule to assign it to a PII technician, and then the case record can be used in order to allow the PII technician to contact the corporation to see how they would like the laptop dealt with. We can have custom fields for to record the action requested, along with case close reason. We'll use milestones to make sure it's completed within 24 hours. The process can also mention the user on chatter in order to alert them to the case that needs to be dealt with. Once the case has been closed, then the laptop status will be updated to released by way of a flow. If it's not been dealt with within 24 hours, we can have a case escalation rule. In terms of the valuation and allocation, so we need to classify the laptop. So this will be done by way of the lookup relationship for the laptop model. So there'll be a maintenance task to import information about available laptop models into that custom object, but once it's there, it can be linked with the laptop. Once the identity of the laptop has been determined in terms of the laptop model, we need to get a valuation for it from the government valuation service. So this will not be integrated via the ESB, it'll be a direct call out from Salesforce. So we'll make use of an Apex call out. I'll assume that it's a REST service. We'll need to have configured the address of the remote service within the remote site settings. And we will get back from that the response which will allow the Apex class to update the laptop record with the appropriate value. So with that update, it will also, because we'll be using OData 4 protocol, it'll be able to, changes to the laptop record will also be reflected within the inventory system. We'll also then use Apex to apply the allocation in order to set the appropriate allocation coordinator user from the available users. This will be done based on the region of that particular user. That can be determined through the role. Then we have a need to allocate it then for recycling. We need to basically ascertain the prices that the recyclers are prepared to pay. Recyclers will make use of the self-service community in order to create offer record prices for laptop models that they are interested in bidding on. And then in terms of the allocation coordinator, they will be able then to look at any particular laptop model and just through the use of the related lists see the top 3 bidders for those particular models. They will then be able to manually create a new allocation record for each of those models. They'll be able to create an allocation record for that particular recycler. And I missed the relationship, that was why I was getting a bit confused. So the allocation will basically be for the offer price that was made for a particular recycling account. And then we'll have an Apex trigger available for us on the creation of the allocation record. So that will then will then be responsible for updating the laptop records within the external object. So that will be done via a SOQL query that matches for the particular model of the laptop. It will then process and allocate those laptops to that particular recycler. In order to work within limits there, I propose that we would make use of batch apex in order to do that. So we now have requirements around allocations to schools. So we have, just one sec. So we have a requirement to be able to match the suitability of schools to the laptop available. So first of all, the laptop models will be marked as, in terms of their suitability, using a pick list field as to what types of subjects they're available, suitable for, or what type of schools they're suitable for. In terms of the maximum 500 laptops allocated per year, we will have an allocation record for each of the allocations which are made to schools. So this will be a different record type on the allocation. There'll be one for the recycling and one for the school. For our schools, it will make use of a roll-up summary field on account in order to keep track of the number of laptops which have been allocated in any particular year. And then should that exceed 500, we can have a process submit the allocation for approval. We're then interested in the inventory allocation and shipping. When the allocation to the school is finalised, then laptops to schools wants to automate the following steps, which is to update the inventory and assign the school volunteer. So the way in which we will achieve that is that there will be for the school allocation record, there will be an outbound message which will then be targeted to the ESB. The ESB will then request the inventory system to allocate the requisite number of laptops for that particular school. So the responsibility of inventory allocation will be taken care of within the inventory system. And then once that process is complete, the ESB would continue the orchestration in order to create the information within the shipping and fulfillment system in order to ship those items to the school. Finally, we'll go back from the ESB to Salesforce via the REST API, and we'll update the allocation record with the order reference that's been created. And then we also need to populate the junction object between the school and the allocation, but also with an additional relationship for who donated. So the origin of the laptops will be stored using the corporate account. So there will be a number of corporate donors for that particular school. Finally, we need to send email confirmation. So this again will be done by way of a Salesforce email message and a template, which is going to use the template with the appropriate language. And then once the laptops have arrived at the school, they need to be set up. The volunteers required to check in when they arrive at the school. This could be achieved using mobile browser login on the Salesforce community, and then a quick action in order to update the allocation record to confirm that the volunteer has checked in. In terms of the files that need to be installed on the laptop, so these will be stored within the cloud storage. The volunteer can make use of their own laptop, log into the community, and then use Files Connect in order to download access and download those binaries ready for installation. We then have a requirement to be able to track the software licenses which were installed on any particular laptop. So I see this as being achieved through a custom component which will validate the serial number against the list of laptops within the external objects using a SOQL query, and then if that is correct, the volunteer will be able to add software licenses to the additional child external object. In terms of collaboration, they'll be able to do that through a chatter group. The end users or the teachers and kids at the school need to be able to upload a thank you video to from their mobile. So this could be achieved just with regular mobile phone recording, and then they can take that file and upload it to Salesforce through the community into the file, and then they can share it with any of the corporate donors via a chatter post. In terms of the troubleshooting, so we need to make use of Live Agent for our virtual experts. So when an issue arises for any of the schools, they'll be able to open a case, and we'll have an assignment rule, I think actually we might want to make use of omni-channel skills-based routing for that, which would be available through the Service Cloud license in order to direct that to the particular volunteer user, given that we've got 1,000 of those. Once that case is established, then they can then proceed to communicate through live chat. So turning to the governance and delivery aspects. So we have several work streams. We have our Salesforce business processes, which could be separated into several concurrent work streams. We have the integration work around the ESB. So I'd see we would have at least 2 streams of work that would be running. So one for our integration and one for our Salesforce delivery. In terms of the integration, we can allow these the integration and Salesforce development to run in parallel if we agree on the contracts for the interfaces which will be used for the ESB. So that would be the creation of the WSDLs for the outbound message, and as well as the service catalog for returning back. The methodologies we can use, we can make use of agile methodology with fairly short sprints, and have some key milestones along the way whereby we can align the different systems. In terms of the environment management, from a Salesforce point of view, we'll need a development environment, an integration environment, a QA environment, pre-prod, and finally production. This will make use of sandbox types. This would be a dev sandbox, this would be a dev pro, ideally a partial for the QA, full copy for the pre, and live is live. In terms of moving the source metadata and changes through, we'll make use of source control using Git. So developers will have feature branches which they will then request a pull into the main dev branch. That will then be promoted through using continuous integration server, so Circle CI or Jenkins, and then we will roll up to the pre-prod branch, and then finally onto the master branch for production. In terms of tests, we'll be looking to use the full copy sandbox in order to do our tests of our data load and our ETL, which will be pre-transformed ahead of its load, and we'll switch off all of the automations. We'll allow multiple streams of development from dev, but they will then combine them within the integration environment in order to have a managed process which goes on through. In terms of organising the project team, we'll have the sponsor at the top. They'll be in charge of a steerco. And then we need to represent the technical stakeholders through a design authority and the business requirements through a project board. And then they will have their requisite resources. Thank you very much.
Cool. You're ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, here we go. So, can you walk me through the process on how the users would, the external user would be able to use Facebook or Twitter to log into the community?
Yeah, for sure. So, we have our school users here. They're going to make use of social sign-on. So in order to set that up within Salesforce, we'll need a authorization provider for the social network in question, Facebook. We'll also need a registration handler class, which we're going to use for the user provisioning. The first time that we'll also set up within Facebook in order to get the client ID information, which we can use to configure our auth provider within Salesforce. So we then come to the point where they try to log in for the first time. So they'll log in from their browser. They'll target Salesforce. We will say, well, we don't have a session for you, so we will redirect back and request that the browser redirect to Facebook. Did I put Facebook on? Let's add Facebook. There we go. So that's step number 3. The response will go back to the user's browser with the credentials page. The user will fill them in and then submit those to Facebook. We'll assume that it's correct. If it is, Facebook will return an acknowledgement back to the browser, requesting the browser to redirect to Salesforce. Contained within the information from Salesforce and the redirect is an access token. That access token will be provided then to Salesforce. It will strip it out, and then it will be able to make a call to the Facebook endpoint requesting the information about the user, because we're using OpenID Connect. So Facebook will then return in response to that access token the user's identifier, which would be their email, and additionally their first name and last name. We would then use that in order to create the contact record and user record within Salesforce, and then we would finally send the response back to the user's browser with the welcome page for the community.
Right, so I remember that you said that the registration process will happen directly on the community. So I'm expecting that the user would already exist in the community at that stage.
Yeah.
So how would that make the flow look different from your perspective? The user is already existing in the system. It's not like we're going to create it.
Okay. So when the access token, when the flow is the same, they will log into Salesforce. They will provide their credentials to Facebook, which will be approved. Facebook will then return an access code, and Salesforce will Salesforce will exchange that access code. No. Yes, it will. So Salesforce will again make the call to Facebook in order to get the details of the user. If they are matching, then Salesforce will establish a session for the user.
Right. So this is assuming that the identifier for the user is the email address, and the email address is the same as the user name in Salesforce. But in normal cases, you would end up with with a username that is concatenated with something, or that is not exactly the same email address for like a couple of limitations. So it's likely that the username on this community is going to be something like matt@gmail.com_community or something, but it's not going to be the exact email address. So how are you going to handle the mapping in this case?
Well, that would be be taken care of within the registration handler. There will be some additional lines of Apex in order to append the uniqueness to the identifier that we would like to use.
What is the registration handler exactly?
It's an Apex class which implements a particular interface, and I can't remember the exact name of it.
All right. So how would that look like if the same user, the second day, decided to log in using Twitter this time?
Potentially it would make a new account for them.
Is there any way that we can also do that mapping in this case?
I can't think of one, sorry.
Okay, no problem. What would happen actually if the user changes the last name on Facebook?
I think we would, well, if the email is the same, then it will be okay.
But would that change Cascade to Salesforce?
Oh, okay. Well, that's really a decision, an implementation decision within the registration handler. We would receive that information back, and then we could include that logic within the Apex to determine whether or not we wanted to update their user information and their contact or not.
Okay. Okay. I would, if Melissa or Gavin want to ask any question.
Yeah. So I guess going to the laptops.
Yeah.
So I might have missed this, but where did you say you were going to store those the external objects to store the laptops?
So the laptops are inventory items within the inventory system. We don't have a lot of details on that. We don't have a lot of details actually around what interfaces are supported through the for the inventory system. So I would propose to have the OData endpoint for Salesforce be within the ESB, and then we will have an integration which will take care of connecting with the inventory system. So that could be through HTTP, or it could be through some other MQ product.
And then so there seems to be quite a lot of relations between the laptops and a number of other objects in the system.
Yeah.
How do you propose that those relationships are maintained?
Yeah, so when we validate and sync the data source, we will get the available published external objects from the OData source. So this will be OData 4, it'll be read-writable. We will select to bring in the laptop, and we will then proceed to customize it. So we can add additional custom fields to the metadata. So that would be these lookup relationships. We can also add additional custom fields should we need to. I'm proposing that all of the fields that exist on our external object should be mapped to fields that exist within the inventory system, as it's going to be our main source of integration. But the simple answer is we will either change field types of existing fields, or we will add additional lookups.
Okay, sure. And just a final question on related note. There's a requirement on page 7 in the accessibility requirements around the laptop not being visible if they have PII information on them. Can you explain a little bit how you would achieve that in the external objects?
Yes. So the way in which I'm proposing to control the visibility to the laptop is by way of the account. Did I do that? No. I missed off a relation. So I'm proposing to control visibility to the laptop through the account the donor account from which they've come. So that's the first layer, whereby it would be allocation coordinators who had visibility to those accounts would be able to see those records. Now, in the situation where we've got laptop records which have been flagged for PII, we're going to update a checkbox field on the object here. I would propose that we would change the account for that particular laptop for the time that it's within the case.
And so in that scenario, what if a school, if an account has two different laptops, only one of them contains PII information and the other does not?
Yeah.
Will that allow?
Yeah. So I think what I'm saying is that I would take that laptop out of general availability by changing the account to which it's associated, and there wouldn't be a tab with direct access to all of the laptops. It would always be that users are accessing through the account. So therefore, we've removed visibility to that particular laptop. I think now that you've kind of highlighted it, yeah, we may need an additional account type which is used temporarily, which would be a PII account type. We would have only our IT specialists be able to see that, and then that would be the parent of the case, and then we could have a lookup relationship, an additional lookup relationship to the case with the account record of the actual original donor, and then when that case is closed, we could have that information available in order to update the laptop record again. So we would then change the laptop records account back to the correct corporate account, and it would again become visible to the allocation coordinator.
And where would you store where the original laptop was? So you're swapping it back and forth.
Yeah, I would use a custom field on the case, so a custom lookup relationship in order to have a corporate donor for for the laptop in question. So the case would have a lookup relationship to the laptop, and then it would be part of the process automation when we close the case in order to return the laptop back into that account ownership.
So sorry, but going back to the laptop privacy thing, the requirement is that the schools shouldn't be able to see other schools' laptops or see the laptops in general. But can they actually see it, considering that this is an external object?
Can who see it? The school?
Other schools, other users, all users actually.
Yes, they would be able to they would be able to see the records. Yes, so we have the ability to set the visibility for the profile access to the external object via profile. What we're looking to control within the hierarchy of it owned by a particular account is the mechanism for whether it be a school or a recycler or an allocation coordinator to have visibility to those child laptop records.
So how is the authentication handled to the OData endpoints?
Okay, so the OData configuration would be through an external data source. So the external data source, in this instance, I would just use named principal, so a system-wide account, in order to access have access to the full set of record data, and then I'm proposing to secure it through the Salesforce visibility settings. I think it would be a future consideration in terms of the investigation as to whether or not we could Yeah, no, actually, I see the question you're answering. So the answer is that it would be name principal for the external data source. So Salesforce has access to the full set of records, laptop records from within the inventory system, and then we make use of a parent object to the laptops in order to control the visibility.
Okay. Sorry, Gavin, I interrupted you somehow.
No, that's okay. I think I was done.
You had some questions, Melissa, or you?
Yeah, I was just wondering why you were recommending, when it's in the requirements, it mentioned the volunteers needing to check in on their mobile device, and also the schools being able to record a thank you video on their mobile device. Why were you recommending the community with web browser? Was that a mobile-based app, or?
No, I don't see the need for a special laptops for schools app in order to access this functionality. So the community is mobile responsive. So the volunteer or the school don't need to install any particular software. They can just log in. So file upload would be available, and the ability to check in is achieved through a quick action.
So you described the interface between Salesforce and the government website.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure that I understood how is that interface working. What is how the process? This whole process is working.
Mm-hmm.
And when are we triggering this interface, and how is
Yeah.
it to be executed?
Okay, so this relates to the requirements described on page 5, item 5. Okay, so 5.3 designations of the monetary value of laptops designated for schools should be updated. Yes, 5.2. So estimated using a website that exposes a web service. So at the point where the classification of the laptop has taken place. Previously, the IT specialist will have selected, will have associated a particular laptop model with the laptop. So at that point, they would be able then to they'd be able to make use of a I see the problem is we can't have a trigger fire off of the laptop, and I think it's the update is happening to the laptop. So I think in that case we've got a couple of choices. Yeah, so I would say that the IT specialist is going to be maintaining the laptop record. So what we can do on there is have a quick action which contains a lightning component. They would then be able to push a button in order to attempt to call out to the government web service. So the button would make use of an Apex class, which would make a REST call out to the government validation service, and then the response when it comes back, the Apex class would be able to update the laptop record and then at that point, the IT specialist would be informed that the valuation had been calculated.
Right, and how would you handle exceptions or timeouts?
Yeah, so the requirement says that it needs to be done in real time. So my reading of that is that the IT specialist is on a UI. They'll try it. If it's not responsive because the service is down for a period of time, then those laptop records will not get updated, and the business process for those will not continue until they've been done. In terms of detecting which laptops need to get valuations, that could be achieved through a report.
Okay, thank you. And why did you choose to go straight from Salesforce to the government website, not the ASP?
We certainly could have. There's no need for any additional orchestration. I mean, I suppose the reliability question could be dealt with through the ESB, and the ESB could retry. That would be another way to solve it. But it really just seemed to be a point-to-point integration with a request response. So that seemed to be the most straightforward approach in that instance.
You also, I think, sorry, but I'm not really familiar with the scenario, but I think there was a part where you described the creation of a donation record via an API. You mentioned a specific authentication mechanism where there's a particular key used to do that.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I'm describing it correctly.
Yeah, no. So this would be the corporate asset management system. So large corporations have their asset management systems with their laptops. There was a request to kind of automate the process of bringing those in. The option that I'm proposing is that we would create a public API using the ESB, and then provide that endpoint and the schema to the corporate entity for them to be able to integrate. In terms of the method of authentication for that, I think given that the information is fairly generic, we can provide them with an API key, which could be stored against their account record in Salesforce. So when the ESB receives a request to the endpoint, it could validate against Salesforce that it was a valid API key. We would then also know which corporate entity it was, in order to then go ahead and create the donation record, and have that same identifier be passed into the inventory system, so that the laptop records were tagged with the appropriate donor.
Okay, can we come up with a better security solution than the API key? Because the API key can be stolen by an employee who's leaving the company, and he can then bomb your system the next day without session throttling. So can we come up with something different?
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're looking here at the capabilities of the ESB. So we could choose to.
So which ESB, by the way, are you recommending in the solution?
I think assuming that we've already got a targeted Salesforce, we could go with MuleSoft. If we're on a budget, we could go with Talend. So I think the optimal solution here would be able to make use of authentication using the credentials that we have within Salesforce. So we could make use of Salesforce identity.
Right. How would that be configured in this case?
Yeah. Okay. So the way that this would need to happen then is that within Salesforce we would configure a connected app and enable it to use OAuth. We would then configure the ESB to use Salesforce as an IDP. And then for the corporate users, depending on the application that they've done, but let's assume it's some sort of web server based web service implementation, they could make use of a web server OAuth flow. So this would at system initiation, we would have a user who would, with their web browser, target the ESB endpoint. The ESB would return back a response redirecting the browser to go to the IDP, which is the Salesforce connected app. The response for that would come back presenting the Salesforce credentials page. The user would then be able to provide their username and password or the system account username and password and submit that response back to Salesforce in order to validate it. If it's correct, then Salesforce would return a response to the browser containing a access code along with instructions to redirect back to the ESB, which will be our resource server. So the ESB is then going to extract the access code, and it's going to then call to the Salesforce endpoint in order to exchange the access code for an access token and also a refresh token. That will come back and will then go back as a response to the browser. So the browser is now in receipt of the session token and also the access token and the access token and the refresh token. The refresh token can be securely stored within the web server application for future use, and then the browser can now be closed, and the server-to-server integration is ready to go.
Thank you. I am going to switch to another question related to the release management.
Mm-hmm.
So you describe a particular release management or release flow here. How are you proposing we can handle hot fixes?
Yes, I didn't speak about it in the presentation, but we could certainly make use of a hotfix branch within our Git branching strategy. I think it really depends on the maturity of the team in the organization for how complicated we want to get with the branching strategy. But we can introduce a hotfix branch, and we can additionally have an additional sandbox. Ideally, it would be a large sandbox for troubleshooting. So, a full copy or a partial copy, in order to allow changes to be made within that sandbox, and then the hotfix branch could be applied into production, and then if all is well, it can be merged back into the master branch.
So where would you branch this hotfix branch from?
It would come off of master, and it would be advanced each time we pushed to master. We would need to move the hotfix head on as well.
And why would you need a full copy sandbox or hotfix sandbox?
So I think that depends on the nature of issues. Ideally, if we have an environment which is representative of production, we would have more chance of being able to replicate the issues. But if we are budget constrained, then we would have to make use of whatever sandbox we could. Potentially, things could be troubleshooting to take place within pre-prod, but that may not be an identical copy of production.
So after you fixed the issue in this hotfix branch,
yeah,
what would you do? and what's going to happen next? How are we going to refresh the other environments?
So it would be merged into master. We would move master on, and that would then prevent any further changes moving up the chain until those particular feature branches within development or the develop branch, and the develop branch had pulled from production in order to refresh their code and metadata, and then those would need to be applied into the sandboxes in the same way that they would in a normal release train.
All right. Any questions, Gavin, Melissa?
Yeah, I just was going to come back to the mobile thing really quick. You mentioned your reasoning was not writing a custom app. I just wanted to know if you can think of any out of the box solutions for that.
Well, the volunteer potentially could make use of the well, not really. No, we're looking for the Salesforce community content rather than kind of internal Salesforce users. So they're still internal. So no, I must be missing something. But for me, the feature requirements don't warrant mobile app. There's no request around branding an app store. I think it's a simple approach.
Okay.
Okay. I still can't remember exactly the use case, but I remember that there was a batch job that is running at the, I think that's the allocation object here over there.
Yep. Yes. So it's just one sec.
I'm sorry, Nathan. Normally the judges would have a multiple answer with each of these lines would have next to it two check boxes. One said requirement identified, and the other says requirement solutions, or like success rate solutions or something. That could actually help them a little bit, and they are more familiar definitely with the scenario.
I remember you doing this scenario, but it was
yes, I remember seeing it like a year ago or 2 years ago, but
let me just find out my notes here. Yes. So it is around the laptop allocation and shipping. So what we're interested in doing is, yes. So again, we're using the external laptop object in order to update the information which is in the inventory system, which is where those inventory records exist. We have the process then of the recyclers putting in their bid, and the allocation manager is going to select the bid that they want and create an allocation record. That allocation record will be for particular laptop models, and so the batch apex, which I see as the I guess the most reliable method of performing this processing. It could be several thousand, it could be tens of thousands of laptops, has effectively got a SOQL query which is going to go against laptop in order to find laptops of that particular model, and then the requisite number would be allocated to the recycling company. So one of the attributes on allocation would be the number of laptops to be processed. So I see that as being an update will be made to the allocation record. So some status saying that it's now ready for allocation, and then that will cause an Apex trigger to fire, and then within that trigger it could then queue the batch jobs.
What
If you updated which record? Oh, the allocation. The allocation has a required number, has a required quantity. I think one of the things that we could do when the batch job finishes is we could update the allocation record with the number of additional allocations which have been made. We could also lock the record when the batch job is submitted, and then have the batch job unlock it on completion as well.
And how are you proposing handling exceptions with updating any of the records in the batch job, or the batch job itself fails for any reason?
We could make use of a custom object in order to have those exceptions logged, and then we can have an admin have a report which is going to give them visibility to that.
And how they can restart the job for these particularly failed records?
I think it would be possible for an admin user to, let's say we've made use of a checkbox here and a validation rule to prevent the record being updated whilst the checkbox is set, and the checkbox can only be updated once the batch job is completed. We can have an admin be able to reset that flag back. Ultimately, the counter would be the governing metric to say whether or not there was any more work that needed to be done.
Okay. What would happen there if multiple allocations were updated quite soon after each other? So not within the same transaction necessarily, but very frequently after each other.
Are you saying if they've got multiple allocations running for the same account or different accounts?
For different accounts, let's say.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I think one way to deal with that in terms of preventing possibly lock contention within laptop would be to not only govern the execution of the batch job through the allocation object, but also the laptop model. So we're not trying to find the same laptop model in multiple jobs that are running.
That's a good point, but I was also suggesting, what if more than 100, say, allocations got updated close to each other? What would happen to the batch jobs?
Oh, they would, yeah. So they would queue up, and that would be my reasoning for making use of a batch apex. So in a situation whereby we start to exhaust the available resources and batch jobs are queuing up, then they will get processed. Exceptions will get logged should they occur.
Is there a limit to that batch job queue?
I think that's a kind of an implementation consideration. One thing I've done previously is that we only ever have we have one batch job which is running, and it's responsible for looking for its next items of work, and then submitting the next batch job after that. So that may be the way that needs to be structured. There's certainly an aspect of batch job management that's involved here. So I think the considerations would be trying to keep it single streamed, or at least single streamed within laptop model, and then having the ability to report on the exceptions and restart the process if needed.
Can you, by the way, walk me through the process on how these laptop records are getting created?
Yes. Let's take the uploads approach. So we have our corporate user. They will create a new donation record via the Salesforce Community UI, and then to that they will attach, upload a CSV file. So within the description of the existing process, that CSV file at the moment comes in different formats, and it's managed by the donation coordinators. What we will require is that it be a common format, and that that file is uploaded by the corporate users themselves. And then once the file has been uploaded, the status will be updated on the donation record, and then that will initiate an integration with the ESB. The ESB will download the binary file, and then it will be responsible for transforming that and inserting those into the inventory system.
Right. So how would you ensure that the CSV is actually correct? I know that you mentioned that there'll be a template or something, but
yeah,
I don't think that could go wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, yeah. First of all, we'll provide a template via the community for people to download. But in terms of exceptions, so the ESB attempts to transform the CSV file, but it doesn't find it in the acceptable format. It will then write back to the donation record via the REST API and set the status to error. So the corporate user will then need to try again.
Okay. So you also mentioned a use case where Salesforce is sending an outbound message to the ESB, and the ESB is updating some value in the inventory system. Salesforce is sending an outbound message to the ESB. The ESB is calling back Salesforce to get some more details
Yep.
and something about the inventory. How is the ESB able to authenticate to Salesforce?
The ESB will authenticate by way of a web server flow, a auth flow.
So again, using as named user, an integration user?
Yes, it will be an integration user in this instance.
What kind of risks do you anticipate from this approach?
Well, if we look at the records which are created and updated via the integration, we have the potential, I guess, to lose visibility as to who last made a change. It becomes slightly less clear. I think we could. I think we. Yeah, I think we. But
Confused you with the question. Sorry.
No.
I don't mean updating Salesforce from the ESB. I'm just referring back to that use case where you are sending an outbound message to the ESB. The ESB is going back to Salesforce and retrieving some records.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are using an integration user in this case, what kind of anticipated risks do you see?
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So we'll require a user with a high level of access. If that's deemed to be outside of what's acceptable to the company. So I mean, this would really be a discussion to be had within the DA and the steerco in consultation with InfoSec. We do have the option then to pass in the outbound message the Salesforce session ID of the user, and then that session ID could be reused in order to make the update.
Yeah, that's enough. I'm done with my questions.
I think that the trade-off with that would be if there were any long-running processes, but I think everything we've got is pretty quick. So.
No, that's fine. I mean, for this use case, you use the session ID because you want to exactly retrieve the records and fields that this particular user can access. In other cases, when you need to update Salesforce for some other use cases, you might be able to use the service user. That's fine. But for this one, it's better to use the same session for the user.
Great.
Make sure that you're only retrieving the thing that you should retrieve. Sorry. Gavin, Melissa, do you have any additional questions? I know time.
No, it's all good. We're at 9:40, so that was good. I start the clock a little bit late. I've got 7 minutes remaining, so I think I started the clock about 5 minutes late.